If nobody takes that jet, they're not coming home. The voice cut through the control room just as another warning siren lit up the walls in red. At 30,000 feet, a fighter aircraft tilted hard to the left, losing altitude faster than anyone could correct. We're at 22,000, controls aren't responding, the pilot's voice cracked over the comms. On the ground, chaos spread in waves. Officers leaned over consoles, calling out numbers, trying to stabilize a situation none of them fully understood. Evelyn Carter stood at the far end of the room, quiet, almost invisible in her standard ground crew uniform. Someone brushed past her shoulder without a glance. "Stay clear, technician. This is pilot-level coordination." She didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the radar screen, tracking something no one else seemed to notice. The storm wasn't random. The interference wasn't natural. Her fingers hovered just above the console, not touching, just feeling the rhythm of the data. Another jet dipped suddenly on screen, falling into the same unstable pattern. "That's the third one," a controller muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Evelyn took a slow breath. 8 years. 8 years since she last heard engines scream like that. 8 years since she walked away without saying why. The room grew louder, more desperate. Commands overlapped, voices strained, systems blinking out of sync. Still, she didn't move. Not yet. Then one of the senior pilots slammed his hand on the desk. "We're out of options. If someone doesn't get up there now, we're going to lose all of them." Silence hit like a shockwave. No one volunteered. No one could. Evelyn's gaze lifted from the radar to the sky beyond the glass windows. Dark clouds twisted unnaturally, like something was pulling them into formation. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. A memory flickered behind her eyes. The same pattern. The same sky. The same mistake. "It's not the storm," she said quietly. No one heard her at first. Then she stepped forward, just one pace. "They're flying into a collapse corridor. You're guiding them straight into it." The nearest officer turned, irritation flashing across his face. "And you would know that how?" For a moment, she said nothing. Her hand rested lightly against the edge of the console, steady, grounded. Then, almost under her breath, she added, "Because I've flown out of one before." The room stilled. Not completely. Just enough for doubt to creep in. The radar flickered again. Another aircraft dropped below 20,000 feet. This time, everyone saw it. And for the first time, someone looked at her like she might not belong on the ground at all. No one spoke for a full second, and in a control room filled with noise, that silence felt louder than any alarm. The officer who had dismissed her earlier narrowed his eyes, studying her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You have flown out of one?" he asked, slower now, less certain. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her gaze had already returned to the radar, tracking the spiraling aircraft now dipping below 18,000 feet. The pilot's voice came through again, strained, breath uneven. "We are losing control authority, instruments are drifting." A second voice cut in, sharper. "I cannot hold altitude. Something is pulling us down." Evelyn's fingers curled slightly against the console edge. That word. Pulling. Not wind. Not turbulence. A pattern. Always a pattern. "You are feeding them the wrong correction," she said, calm but firm. "You are telling them to climb against the pressure. That makes it worse." A few heads turned now. Not all. Just enough. Doubt was spreading, thin but real. The senior controller shook his head, defensive. We are following standard recovery protocol. That protocol assumes a random storm, Evelyn replied, her voice still quiet, but it carried. This is not random. Another alarm flashed. One of the jets dropped to 16,000 feet. The room shifted again. Less confidence. More urgency. The officer stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. Then what would you do? For a moment, she hesitated. Not because she did not know. Because saying it out loud meant stepping back into something she had buried for 8 years. Her eyes flickered, just briefly, to the window. The sky outside churned in slow, unnatural layers. She had seen that sky before. She remembered how it ended. You do not fight it, she said finally. You ride the collapse. Confusion crossed several faces. One technician frowned. Ride it? That makes no sense. Evelyn exhaled slowly, steadying herself. You let the aircraft descend with the pressure. You angle 15 degrees off vector, not against it. You follow the curve until it releases you. Silence again. This time heavier. The senior controller glanced at his screen, then back at her. That is not in any manual. No, she said softly. It is not. Another warning blared. 14,000 feet now. Time was running out. The officer looked around the room, then back at Evelyn. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. How are you so sure? Her jaw tightened, just enough to betray the weight behind her calm. Because the last time someone ignored that, we did not make it out. The words hung there, unfinished, but everyone felt what she did not say. A hand hovered over the comms panel. No one moved to stop it this time. The officer hesitated, then nodded once. Patch her through. A technician blinked. Sir? Do it. The channel opened with a soft click. Static filled the air for half a second before the struggling pilot's voice returned. Control, we are losing. Evelyn stepped closer, her presence suddenly impossible to ignore. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Listen carefully, she said, steady, precise. Stop climbing. Drop with the pressure. Angle 15 degrees to your right. Do not fight it. There was a pause on the other end. Then confusion. Then hesitation. Control, confirm. The officer looked at her. For the first time, there was no doubt in his eyes. Only a decision. Follow her instructions, he said. The pilot took a breath. Copy, adjusting. Every eye in the room locked onto the radar. The aircraft dipped once more, then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the descent began to stabilize. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Someone whispered, "It is working." Evelyn did not react. She just watched, silent, as if she had been here before. Because she had. The numbers on the screen steadied for less than a second, then another. Warning surged across the console as a second aircraft dipped sharply, dropping past 13,000 feet. It is happening again, someone whispered, the tension snapping right back into place. The first pilot's voice returned, sharper now but controlled. Descent slowing. I am holding at 15,000. A breath moved through the room, not relief, not yet. Just a fragile pause. Evelyn did not look away. Tell him to keep the angle. Do not correct too early, she said, her tone unchanged, steady as if the chaos did not exist. The officer related immediately this time. No hesitation. No argument. Something had shifted. Trust, quiet and reluctant, was beginning to form. Another aircraft came over the channel, voice tight with strain. Control, I am entering the same pattern. Instruments are lagging. Evelyn stepped closer to the microphone without asking permission. Do not chase your altitude, she said, calm but firm. Let it drop. Count 3 seconds between each correction. Stay ahead of the curve, not inside it. There was a pause. Then a simple reply. Copy. The radar flickered again. 3 aircraft now inside the same collapsing corridor. 3 different pilots, all relying on a voice that had not been in the sky for nearly a decade. The senior controller watched the data scroll, his expression no longer skeptical. It was something else now. Recognition, maybe. Or realization. Where were you stationed? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Evelyn did not answer. Her eyes tracked the movement of the storm outside the glass, the way the clouds twisted in layers, pulling inward like a slow spiral. The same sky. The same pattern. 8 years ago, she had watched it take everything. Her grip on the console tightened for a fraction of a second, then released. They are reaching the release point, she said. Get ready. The officer leaned forward. Release point. The moment the pressure breaks, she replied. If they miss it, it will pull them back in. Silence again. Every screen in the room seemed to hold its breath. On the radar, the first aircraft approached the edge of the distortion. The line wavered, unstable, then suddenly, it straightened. I am clear, the pilot's voice came through, disbelief cutting through the static. I am clear. A wave of stunned relief rippled across the room. Someone exhaled loudly. Another person sat back in their chair, hands shaking slightly. But Evelyn did not move. Do not celebrate yet, she said softly. The others are still inside. The second aircraft followed seconds later, struggling, then stabilizing just beyond the same invisible boundary. I see it, the pilot said. Following through. The third one lagged behind, deeper in the collapse, its descent more aggressive. The numbers dropped again. 11,000 feet. 10. The room tightened. He is too deep, a technician murmured. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, focus sharpening. No, she said quietly. He just needs to trust it. She leaned closer to the mic, her voice lowering, more personal now. Listen to me, she said. Do not fight the pull. You are almost there. Hold your angle. Count it out. A pause. Then the pilot's voice, steadier than before. 1, 2, 3, the radar line trembled, dipped once more, then slowly, impossibly, began to rise. The room did not cheer. It could not. Not yet. Because everyone was now looking at the same thing. Not the sky. Not the aircraft. But her. The quiet technician who spoke like someone who had lived through this before. And in that silence, the question no one had asked yet finally took shape in every mind. Who exactly was Evelyn Carter? You just saved 3 aircraft, the senior controller said under his breath, but Evelyn did not turn, did not acknowledge it, her eyes still fixed on the radar where the last jet finally stabilized at 12,000 feet, climbing slowly now, free from the invisible grip that had nearly taken them all. The room exhaled as one, a quiet release that carried relief, disbelief, and something else forming beneath it. Respect, though no one said it out loud. Not yet. The officer who had first dismissed her stepped closer again, slower this time, like approaching something he did not fully understand. That pattern, you recognized it immediately, he said. That is not standard training. Evelyn remained still, her posture calm, almost detached, but her fingers had tightened slightly at her sides. It is not taught, she replied. Her voice carried less weight now, softer, as if the urgency had passed and taken something with it. On the main screen, the storm continued to churn, but now it looked different. Less chaotic. More deliberate. The kind of system that followed rules no one had written down. The senior controller glanced at the data log scrolling across his monitor, then back at her. We have never seen anything like that before. Evelyn's eyes flickered, just for a moment. You have, she said quietly. You just did not survive it last time. That line settled heavily into the room. A few heads turned. Someone opened their mouth, then closed it again. The officer frowned. What do you mean last time? She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped back from the console, creating a small distance between herself and the center of attention that had formed without her consent. The noise in the room began to return in fragments. Pilots confirming status. Systems recalibrating. Orders being rewritten on the fly. But the focus did not leave her. Not really. Pull up historical anomalies, the senior controller said suddenly, his voice sharper now, driven by something deeper than curiosity. Search atmospheric irregularities matching that pattern. A technician hesitated, then began typing. Screens shifted. Data archives opened. Old logs, buried under years of updates and revisions, flickered back to life. It took less than a minute. Then the system paused. Highlighted something. A date. 8 years ago. The room went quiet again, not because of alarms this time, but because of recognition. There was an incident, the technician said slowly, reading from the screen. Unclassified as equipment failure. Multiple aircraft lost signal in a similar formation. The officer's eyes moved from the screen to Evelyn, then back again. No survivors listed. The words hung there. Cold. Final. Evelyn did not react outwardly. No flinch. No visible emotion. Just a stillness that felt heavier than anything said aloud. The senior controller leaned closer to the monitor, scanning deeper into the file. Wait, there is a note here. His voice dropped. Unconfirmed pilot recovered. Identity, sealed. Silence pressed in from all sides. The officer took a step toward her, slower now, careful. Was that you? He asked. For the first time since the alarms began, Evelyn looked away from the screens. Her gaze shifted toward the window, toward the sky that was finally beginning to settle. The storm was breaking, but the memory was not. She did not answer directly. Instead, she spoke just above a whisper. They called it a failure, she said. It was not. The room held still, waiting. Then she added, quieter still, it was a lesson. No one asked what that lesson cost. They did not need to. Because in that moment, every person in the room understood one thing clearly. The woman they had ignored was not just someone who knew the pattern. She was the only one who had ever made it out of it alive. No one spoke after that. The weight of her words settled into the room like something permanent, something that could not be undone. The senior controller slowly straightened, his eyes no longer scanning the screens but fixed on Evelyn with a kind of quiet realization that had replaced every ounce of earlier doubt. "You were there," he said, not as a question this time, but as a conclusion. Evelyn did not confirm it. She did not deny it either. Her silence was enough. Across the room, the technician pulled up more fragments from the archived report, digging deeper now that they knew what they were looking for. "There are flight logs attached," he said, his voice lower, more careful. "Partial recovery, incomplete data." The officer stepped closer. "Show it." The screen shifted again, lines of old telemetry appearing, faded but still readable. Altitude fluctuations. Sudden drops. Unexplained corrections that mirrored exactly what had just happened minutes ago. Then a single identifier appeared in the log. A call sign. The room froze again, but this time it was different. Not confusion. Recognition building in real time. "Skyfall," the technician read aloud, almost uncertain of his own voice. The name lingered in the air. The officer looked at Evelyn, his expression tightening as the final piece slid into place. "That was you," he said quietly. Evelyn's gaze did not meet his. She was already looking back at the window, where the storm had begun to break apart into scattered clouds, the sky slowly reclaiming its calm. For a moment, she seemed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere 8 years behind them. "It was a call sign," she said softly. "Nothing more." But no one believed that. Not anymore. The senior controller stepped closer, lowering his voice instinctively, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something fragile. "That log shows you stayed in the corridor longer than any of the others," he said. "You held position while the rest of the formation tried to climb out." Evelyn's jaw tightened just enough to be noticed. "They followed the protocol," she replied. "I did not." The officer glanced back at the screen, then at her again. "And you made it out." A pause. Then, quieter, "alone." The word did not echo, but it did not need to. It landed exactly where it was meant to. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief second, not long enough for anyone to comment, but long enough to feel like something had surfaced that she had spent years keeping buried. When she opened them again, the calm had returned, but it was thinner now, more deliberate. "We were not supposed to be there," she said, her voice steady but distant. "The pattern was not on any chart. The data did not match anything we had trained for." She shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself back in the present. "By the time we realized what it was already too late to follow instructions." The room remained completely still. No one interrupted. No one questioned. "So I stopped listening," she continued quietly. "I watched the sky instead." The senior controller exhaled slowly, absorbing every word. "And that is what you just did again," he said. Evelyn gave the smallest nod. Not pride. Not confirmation. Just acknowledgement. Behind them, a pilot's voice came through the comms, clearer now, stable. "Control, all aircraft accounted for. We are out of the disturbance and returning to base." A ripple moved through the room, softer this time. Relief, real and earned. But even That did not pull attention away from her. The officer took one final step closer, his voice low, almost respectful. "Why did you never come back?" Evelyn did not answer right away. Her eyes remained on the sky, now calm, almost peaceful, as if nothing had happened at all. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Because surviving it once was enough." The room remained quiet even after the pilots confirmed they were safe, as if no one quite knew how to return to normal after what had just happened. The storm outside had weakened into scattered clouds, sunlight beginning to break through in thin streaks, but inside, something else had shifted that could not be undone. The senior controller finally stepped back from the console, his posture straighter now, more deliberate. "We need to update every protocol we have," he said, not loudly, but with certainty. "What we just saw cannot be ignored again." A few heads nodded, slower this time, thoughtful instead of reactive. The officer who had challenged her earlier did not speak. He simply watched Evelyn, his expression no longer guarded, but measured, like he was recalibrating everything he thought he understood. She had already stepped away from the center of the room, back toward the edge where she had stood before, as if the attention did not belong to her. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, steady again, controlled. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they would have seen nothing extraordinary. Just a quiet technician among many. But no one in that room saw her that way anymore. "Evelyn," the senior controller said, her name carrying across the space with a weight it did not have before, "we need you to walk us through exactly what you saw. Every detail." She paused. Not long, but long enough to feel the choice in it. Then she shook her head slightly. "You do not need me to," she replied. "You saw it yourselves." He took a step closer. "We saw the result. That is not the same thing." Her eyes lifted to meet his for the first time since the reveal. There was no defiance there. No arrogance. Just a quiet boundary. "Then write it down," she said. "But do not turn it into something simple. It is not." The officer let out a breath, almost a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Nothing about that was simple," he admitted. A brief silence followed, softer now, less tense. The kind that comes after something has been understood, even if only partially. Across the room, the technician was still staring at the archived call sign on the screen, as if afraid it might disappear if he looked away. "Skyfall," he said again under his breath, this time with a different tone. Not curiosity. Recognition. Evelyn heard it. Of course she did. But she did not react. Instead, she turned her attention back to the window, where the sky had finally opened into clear blue. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing evenly, as if grounding herself in something quiet and present. The officer stepped closer one last time, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You could have stayed silent," he said. "No one would have known." Evelyn's gaze did not leave the sky. "They would have," she answered softly. "Just not in time." He studied her profile, searching for something more, some explanation that would make sense of the past 8 years, but there was nothing offered. Only stillness. Only control. Finally, he gave a small nod, not as a command, but as acknowledgement. "Understood," he said. Behind them, the room slowly returned to motion. Systems reset. Voices resumed. But the tone had changed. Quieter. More deliberate. And every now and then, someone would glance in her direction, just for a second, as if confirming she was still there. Evelyn did not stay much longer. She stepped away from the window, her movements unhurried, almost unnoticed if not for the awareness that followed her now. No one stopped her. No one tried. As she reached the doorway, the senior controller spoke once more, not loudly, but enough. "For what it is worth," he said, "you did more than save them." She paused, just briefly, her hand resting against the frame of the door. Then she answered without turning back. "I just did not let it happen again." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a room that would never see the sky the same way. The hallway outside the control room felt different, quieter in a way that did not come from silence but from distance, like the world had taken a step back after holding its breath too long. Evelyn walked without rushing, her pace even, her expression unchanged, but the weight behind her eyes had not fully settled. The sound of her boots against the polished floor echoed softly, steady and controlled, each step pulling her further away from the room that had just uncovered a version of her she had kept buried for 8 years. Behind her, the door remained open for a moment before closing with a soft click, sealing off the voices, the questions, the realization that had spread through everyone inside. She did not look back. She never did. The corridor stretched ahead, long and empty, lined with glass panels that reflected fragments of her movement as she passed. For a brief second, she caught her reflection. Same uniform. Same calm posture. Nothing about her appearance suggested what had just happened. That was always the point. Halfway down the hall, a voice called out, not loud, but clear enough to stop her. "Carter." She paused, just slightly, then turned. The officer from earlier stood at the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, his posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive. There was something else there now. Respect, yes, but also something quieter. Understanding, maybe. He walked toward her, closing the distance with measured steps. "They are asking for you upstairs," he said. "Command wants a full report." Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, unreadable. "They already have one," she replied. "It is in the archive." He exhaled softly, almost a quiet acknowledgement of how little that report had truly explained. "This is different," he said. "They want to hear it from you." A pause settled between them. Not tense. Just real. Evelyn's eyes drifted past him, toward the distant window at the end of the corridor where sunlight now poured in, bright and steady, as if the storm had never existed. "I am not going back up there," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but there was no room in it for negotiation. The officer studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod, accepting it without pushing further. "Understood," he said quietly. He hesitated, then added, "They are going to ask why you stayed hidden." Evelyn did not respond right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the light ahead, her posture still, composed. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost distant. "Because it was not something to carry into a normal life," she said. "And I was done being the one who walked away when everyone else did not." The words lingered, heavier than she intended, but she did not take them back. The officer did not reply immediately. He simply stood there, letting the meaning settle, understanding more in that silence than any explanation could offer. "Well," he said after a moment, "today you did not walk away." Evelyn gave the faintest shift of her head, not quite a nod, not quite a denial. "Today was different," she said. He watched her for another second, then stepped back slightly, giving her space. "For what it is worth," he added, they are going to remember what you did. Evelyn's expression did not change. That is not why I did it. Another pause. Then she turned again, continuing down the corridor toward the light, her figure steady, unhurried. Behind her, the officer remained where he was, watching until she disappeared around the corner. And for the first time since the alarms began, the building felt still, not because nothing was happening, but because something important had already happened, something that did not need to be repeated, only remembered. The light at the end of the corridor felt warmer than it should have, almost unfamiliar after the cold tension of the control room, but Evelyn did not slow as she stepped into it, her eyes adjusting to the brightness without hesitation, as if she had always preferred clarity over comfort. Outside the glass doors, the runway stretched wide and open, the sky now calm, a deep blue with only faint traces of the storm drifting away in thin, dissolving lines. It looked ordinary again, like nothing had ever gone wrong. That was the part she never trusted. She pushed the door open and stepped outside, the air cooler than she expected, carrying that quiet after a storm when everything seems still but not quite settled. In the distance, the returning aircraft began to appear, one by one, descending in controlled patterns, their engines steady, their paths clean. She watched them without moving, her posture relaxed but her attention precise, tracking every detail the way she always had. 8 years ago, she had watched a sky that looked just as calm before it changed. 8 years ago, she had learned that silence in the air did not mean safety. A vehicle rolled to a stop nearby, and a crew member stepped out, pausing when he saw her standing alone. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he simply gave a small nod, subtle, respectful, then moved on. That was how it would be now. Not loud recognition. Not questions. Just quiet understanding, passed in glances and small gestures. Evelyn turned slightly as the first jet touched down, wheels meeting the runway with a controlled impact that echoed across the field. It taxied smoothly, slowing, stabilizing, returning to something predictable. She followed its movement until it came to a stop, then shifted her gaze to the next one descending through the sky. Her breathing remained even, but there was something deeper beneath it, something she did not show. Not relief. Not pride. Just a sense of completion, like closing a chapter she never expected to revisit. Behind her, the door opened again. Footsteps approached, slower this time, more deliberate than before. The senior controller stepped out onto the tarmac, stopping a few feet away from her, giving space without needing to be asked. They all made it back, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded once, her eyes still on the sky. They adjusted, she replied. That is what matters. He watched her for a moment, then glanced up at the horizon where the last aircraft was beginning its descent. We are going to change how we train, he said. What you showed us, it cannot be lost again. Evelyn did not respond right away. The wind shifted slightly, brushing against her uniform, carrying the distant sound of engines and something softer underneath. Memory, maybe. Do not turn it into a rule, she said finally. If you do, it will fail the next time. He frowned slightly. Then what do we do? She lowered her gaze for a brief moment, then looked back up, her expression calm but firm. Teach them to see, she said. Not just to follow. The words settled between them, simple on the surface, but carrying more weight than any manual ever could. The controller gave a slow nod, understanding that what she was offering was not a technique, but a mindset. Something harder to define. Something harder to forget. The last jet touched down, rolling across the runway with a steady rhythm, completing the sequence. The sky was clear now. Completely clear. Evelyn watched it for a few seconds longer, then turned away, her steps quiet against the concrete as she began to walk along the edge of the field. No one called after her. No one tried to stop her. Behind her, the base continued to move, to adapt, to record what had happened. But ahead of her, there was only open space and a sky that, for now, had chosen to remain still. She did not look back. She never did. The runway grew quieter as the last aircraft powered down, engines winding into a low hum that faded into the background like a breath finally released, and for the first time since the alarms began, there was nothing urgent left to fix, nothing left to chase, only the steady rhythm of a base returning to normal. Evelyn walked along the edge of the field, her steps unhurried, her gaze forward, as if the sky behind her no longer needed watching. Ground crews moved in the distance, guiding jets into position, checking systems, resetting what had been shaken, but every now and then, someone would glance in her direction, just for a second, as if confirming what they had seen was real. No one approached her. No one called her name. Respect, here, did not arrive loudly. It settled in quietly, the same way she had always carried herself. Near the far end of the runway, she slowed, stopping where the concrete met a stretch of open ground, the horizon wide and unobstructed. The sky above it was clear now, completely still, a deep blue that gave no hint of what it had been just an hour ago. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the calm, letting it replace the tension that had been held too tightly for too long. A faint sound reached her from behind, not footsteps this time, but the soft click of a radio being adjusted. One of the pilots who had just landed stood several yards away, helmet in hand, watching her with an expression that carried something deeper than gratitude. He did not step closer. He did not need to. Control said it was you, he called out, his voice steady but quieter than expected. Evelyn did not turn right away. When she did, it was only enough to meet his gaze briefly. You flew it out, she replied. That is what matters. He shook his head slightly, a small, honest gesture. We followed a voice we did not understand, he said. That is not something you forget. A pause stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just real. Evelyn studied him for a second, then looked back at the sky. Then remember the pattern, she said. Not the person. The pilot nodded slowly, as if committing that to memory, then stepped back, leaving her to the quiet she had chosen. The base continued behind her, movement returning, structure rebuilding, but out here, at the edge, there was only space and silence. After a moment, Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn tag, its surface dulled by time, the engraving faint but still visible if you knew what to look for. She held it between her fingers, not tightly, just enough to feel its weight. 8 years. 8 years since she last allowed herself to remember what it stood for. Her thumb brushed across the letters once, then she exhaled softly and closed her hand around it. Not hiding it. Not displaying it. Just holding it, steady, like everything else. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the distant sound of engines preparing for the next flight cycle, the next routine mission that would look simple on the surface and carry more than anyone expected beneath it. Evelyn slipped the tag back into her pocket and lifted her gaze to the sky one last time. It was quiet. For now. She turned away without hesitation and began walking toward the far edge of the base, where the structures thinned and the road stretched outward beyond the gates. No one stopped. her. No one asked her to stay. Because some roles were never meant to be permanent. Some people were not meant to be seen until the moment they were needed. And when that moment passed, they returned to silence just as naturally as they had stepped out of it. Behind her, the runway remained active, the sky remained open, and the people who had witnessed what happened would carry it forward in ways that no report could fully capture. Ahead of her, there was only distance and the quiet understanding that she did not need to fly again to prove anything. She had already done what mattered. And somewhere above, in a sky that looked ordinary again, the lesson remained, unseen but never gone. Respect was not something she asked for. It was something that followed her anyway, in silence.